When people talk about the origins of the Trail Saga, most immediately point to the legend of heroes, trails in the sky. But for many Western players, the true starting point came earlier, with the Legend of Heroes, a tier of Vermillion on the PlayStation Portable. Originally released in Japan as part of the Gag-Harv trilogy, a tier of Vermillion is technically the fourth main entry in the broader The Legend of Heroes. The Gag-Harv trilogy itself consists of three interconnected titles: The Legend of Heroes 3, White Witch, The Legend of Heroes 4, a tier of Vermillion, and The Legend of Heroes V, Cage Song of the Ocean. Together, these three games tell a sweeping narrative set across the Gag-Harv region, with shared history, lore, and thematic connections tying them into one larger saga. But here's what makes a tier of Vermillion especially important. When it launched in North America in 2005 on PSP, it was the first of the three Gag-Harv games to release in the West. For Western players, this wasn't the middle chapter of a trilogy. It was the introduction. It was their first step into Falcom's world-building philosophy. Long-form storytelling, evolving NPC dialogue, layered political tension, and emotional character arcs that carried real weight. The story follows Avon, a kind-hearted young man whose peaceful life is shattered by tragedy. Alongside his sister Imel, he embarks on a journey that begins as a personal quest, but slowly unfolds into a much larger conflict involving ancient powers, religious institutions, political struggles, and the mysterious tier of Vermillion itself. What starts small becomes epic, but it never loses its emotional core, and that emotional core is strengthened by the romance woven throughout the narrative. Unlike later entries in the Trails subseries that experiment with multiple bonding routes, a tier of Vermillion takes a focused, story-driven approach to romance. The relationship development feels natural and gradual, growing through shared hardship and quiet character moments. The romance isn't flashy or exaggerated. It's sincere, tender, and deeply tied to the themes of faith, destiny, sacrifice, and perseverance. When the stakes rise, they don't just threaten the world. They threaten the bonds the characters have built. That grounding gives a larger conflict a human heartbeat. Gameplay supports that storytelling style. Combat plays out in a grid-based, turn-based system where positioning matters. Characters move across the battlefield with defined ranges for attacks and spells, adding a tactical layer to traditional JRPG mechanics. While simpler than later Trail systems, you can clearly see the early DNA of strategic combat design forming here. Party coordination, spell timing, and battlefield placement all play a role in success. Exploration follows a classic structure, traveling between towns, uncovering lore, recruiting allies, and watching NPC dialogue evolve as the story progresses. That evolving world, where people react to major events, is something Falcom would later perfect in the Trail series. The seeds were already planted here in Gag-Harv. The Western release of a tier of Vermillion was a quiet but pivotal moment. At a time when story-heavy JRPGs were still niche outside Japan, it demonstrated that there was an audience willing to embrace slower pacing, deeper character writing, and interconnected storytelling. It tested the waters. It proved the demand was there. Without that PSP release opening the door, it's possible that Trails in the Sky might not have reached Western audiences when it did, or at least not in the same way. The idea of a world that spans multiple games, where events matter years later, where politics and personal relationships intertwine, that philosophy was already alive in the Gag-Harv trilogy. Looking back, a tier of Vermillion represents more than just an early 2000s handheld RPG. It was part of a three-game epic. It was the first of that trilogy to arrive in the West. It introduced many players to Falcom's storytelling style. It blended heartfelt romance with political and spiritual conflict, and it quietly laid the foundation for what would eventually become one of the most ambitious interconnected RPG sagas in gaming history. Before Liberal, before Crossbell, before Erebonia. For many Western fans, the legend truly began with Gag-Harv, and with a single tier of Vermillion,